Imagine a weapon so simple, so ordinary, that the enemy thought it was harmless, until it stopped entire battalions in their tracks. No guns, no grenades, just a rusted shovel, a wire, and a single soldier's cunning mind. They banned it because it was too effective. Today, we're diving into a story of ingenuity, fear, and defiance that changed the rules of war forever. Stay tuned, because what you're about to see will make you question everything you thought you knew about power on the battlefield. We'll explain everything in this video step by step. Don't skip it. They banned his weapon, not a rifle, not a machine gun, not a missile. They banned a rusted shovel tied to a wire. And in doing so, they quietly admitted something terrifying, that one ordinary soldier with almost nothing had become too effective to ignore. In the official records of war, victories are measured in territory gained, battles won, flags raised. But history is not only written by generals and governments. Sometimes history is written in mud, silence, and ingenuity by men whose names never make headlines. This is one of those stories. He was not trained in elite academies. He did not carry experimental weapons or advanced gear. He was a defender, stationed in a place where supply lines were thin, morale was thinner, and survival depended on creativity. The battlefield was unforgiving, forests thick enough to swallow sound, trenches carved by exhaustion, nights so dark it erased rank, language, and fear into the same blackness. The enemy had better weapons, better numbers, better logistics. What he had was time, patience, and a shovel already bent by years of digging graves and defenses. The idea was simple, almost insultingly so. He buried the shovel blade upright just beneath the surface, attached a thin wire, connected it to an improvised trigger. No explosives at first, no gunfire, just pain, panic, and confusion. When soldiers advanced at night, they didn't hear it, didn't see it, they felt it. Sharp, sudden, personal. The shovel didn't kill, most of them. It wounded, and in war, a wounded soldier can be more disruptive than a dead one. Cries echoed through the trees, units froze, advances stalled, and slowly something unexpected happened. Fear changed sides. Enemy patrols began avoiding entire routes. Maps were redrawn. Timetables slipped. Commanders started asking questions no modern military wants to ask. What exactly is stopping us? The answer embarrassed them. A single defender using scrap metal and string. Reports moved up the chain of command, not in dramatic language, but in irritation, unpredictable traps, psychological impact, unacceptable disruption. They studied the devices, took photographs, issued countermeasures, and then quietly they did something extraordinary. They banned the shovel tripwire, not because it violated the laws of physics, but because it violated the rules of control. Think about that. In a world where artillery levels cities, where bombs erase neighborhoods, where millions die under sanctioned weapons, a rusted shovel became too dangerous. Why? Because it proved a truth war planners hate, that dominance is fragile, that technology can be outmatched by imagination, that human will, focused, patient, relentless, can reshape battlefields. The man himself never celebrated. He kept working, digging, listening, waiting. He knew something the history books often forget. War is not won by glory. It is endured by those who adapt. When the ban came, he adjusted, changed designs, changed placements, because banning an idea does not erase it. Years later, historians would debate the legality of such traps. Analysts would argue ethics. Military journals would reduce his story to footnotes and diagrams. But none of them could fully capture the truth that somewhere in the dirt of a forgotten front, a tired soldier with a shovel forced a powerful army to stop and say, "We cannot allow this." Simplicity can defeat. Superiority is one of the most uncomfortable truths in the history of war because it challenges everything powerful armies believe about themselves. Superiority is built on numbers, technology, budgets, training manuals, and the assumption that force applied at scale will always crush resistance. Simplicity, on the other hand, is born from scarcity. It comes from empty supply crates, worn-out tools, and minds forced to solve problems without permission or resources. When these two forces meet, history shows again and again that superiority does not always win. And when it loses, it often loses to something embarrassingly simple. In war, superiority creates predictability. Armies with advanced weapons move according to doctrine. They follow schedules, routes, formations, and rules designed to minimize risk. These systems are efficient, but they are also rigid. Simplicity thrives in the cracks of rigidity. A simple tactic does not need approval from a command structure. It does not require specialized equipment or perfect conditions. It adapts instantly to terrain, weather, and human behavior. That adaptability is often more powerful than firepower. A simple weapon or tactic forces a superior force to overthink. When an army expects missiles and encounters wire, when it prepares for tanks and meets holes in the ground, its advantage becomes confusion. Confusion slows movement. Slowness creates vulnerability. Vulnerability spreads fear. Fear disrupts discipline. Discipline is the true backbone of superiority, not weapons. Once discipline cracks, superiority becomes weight instead of strength. Throughout history, armies with fewer resources have relied on simplicity, not as a choice, but as necessity. Guerrilla fighters, resistance movements, and isolated defenders have always understood that they cannot win by matching strength with strength. Instead, they look for a balance. A simple trap does not aim to destroy an entire unit. It aims to interrupt momentum. A delayed convoy can change the outcome of a campaign. A wounded soldier pulls others away from the fight. A sudden noise in the dark forces soldiers to hesitate, and hesitation is deadly on a battlefield. Superiority depends on control. Control of terrain, control of information, control of timing. Simplicity disrupts control by being unpredictable. A simple device can be built anywhere, hidden anywhere, and understood only by the person who placed it. There is no centralized system to shut down, no signal to intercept, no supply line to cut. The simplicity itself becomes camouflage. Advanced armies often underestimate simple tactics because they do not fit into simulations or training exercises. War games account for known threats, not improvised ones. A rusted tool or a handmade device does not appear in glossy manuals. When such a tactic succeeds, it exposes a blind spot in the logic of superiority. That exposure is dangerous because it reveals that power is not absolute. Simplicity also carries a psychological weight that advanced weapons do not. A missile strike is terrifying, but it is distant and impersonal. A simple trap is intimate. It exists at ground level, where soldiers walk, breathe, and listen. It makes the environment itself feel hostile. Roads become threats. Trees become suspects. Silence becomes suspicious. This constant tension exhale. Even the most well-equipped forces, when superiority faces simplicity, it often responds by escalating complexity. More equipment, more rules, more procedures. But every added layer creates more points of failure. Soldiers must remember protocols instead of trusting instincts. They must wait for clearance instead of acting. Meanwhile, the simple tactic remains unchanged, repeating its effect over and over with minimal effort. Simplicity also spreads faster than technology. A complex weapon requires training, maintenance, and supply. A simple idea can be shared in seconds. It can be replicated with local materials. It does not need permission to exist. Once a simple tactic proves effective, it multiplies, appearing in places the superior force did not anticipate. This creates the illusion of omnipresence, making the enemy feel surrounded even when they are not. Another reason simplicity defeats superiority is that it aligns with human creativity. Under pressure, humans innovate best when constraints are tight. Scarcity sharpens focus. A defender with limited options thinks differently from an attacker with endless tools. The defender looks at what is available and asks how it can be used in a way no one expects. This mindset produces solutions that are invisible to planners far from the battlefield. Superiority often relies on deterrence, the idea that overwhelming force will discourage resistance. Simplicity undermines deterrence by proving that resistance does not require parity. When a simple tactic succeeds against advanced forces, it inspires others. It sends a message that power can be challenged without matching it. This inspiration is dangerous to dominant powers because it spreads beyond the battlefield into belief. There is also a moral dimension. A simple tactic used by a defender often feels justified, even inevitable. It is framed as survival, not aggression. Superior forces struggle to counter this narrative. When they respond with bans or prohibitions, it can appear as weakness rather than authority. The act of banning a simple method is an admission that superiority has limits. Simplicity thrives in environments where superiority struggles most: dense terrain, urban spaces, forests, mountains, and night. These environments strip away technological advantages and return conflict to human senses. Sight is limited, sound is distorted, machines become cumbersome. In these conditions, a simple idea can dominate an expensive system. The greatest strength of simplicity is that it does not seek victory in the traditional sense. It seeks persistence. It aims to endure, to slow, to drain. Superior forces are built for decisive outcomes. They want battles to end. Simplicity keeps conflict unresolved. It turns war into a long problem instead of a short campaign. Over time, this persistence reshapes strategy. Commanders begin allocating disproportionate resources to counter small threats. Entire units are diverted to deal with minor disruptions. The cost-benefit balance shifts. Superiority becomes inefficient. What was once overwhelming becomes burdensome. Simplicity also resists adaptation. A complex system can be analyzed, countered, and neutralized. A simple tactic can change shape instantly. A wire becomes a string. A tool becomes another tool. The principle remains the same, but the form evolves. This constant evolutio frustrates attempts at standard solutions. In many wars, the ultimate defeat of superior forces did not come from losing battles, but from losing patience. Simplicity accelerates this loss. It creates constant friction without providing a clear target to destroy. Soldiers begin to feel hunted rather than hunting. This reversal erodes morale, no matter how advanced the equipment. Simplicity reminds us that war is fought by humans, not machines. Humans get tired. Humans make mistakes. Humans fear what they cannot predict. A simple tactic exploits these truths directly without mediation. It speaks the language of instinct rather than calculation. When superiority fails against simplicity, it often rewrites the rules. New laws, new restrictions, new doctrines emerge. These changes are framed as ethical or legal, but beneath them lies a strategic confession that raw power was not enough. The battlefield had been shaped by something smaller, quieter, and closer to the ground. Simplicity does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. It operates in silence, repeating small actions that accumulate into large effects. By the time superiority recognizes the threat, it has already altered behavior, movement, and decision-making across the battlefield. embedding itself into the daily experience of soldiers who begin to move differently, think differently, hesitate differently, carrying the awareness that danger no longer comes only from the enemy they can see, but from the ground beneath their feet, the darkness between steps, the ordinary objects that now feel altered, repurposed, watching, waiting, existing not as weapons of power, but as expressions of will shaped by necessity and resolve, continuing to function regardless of bans, doctrines, or declarations, sustained by the simple truth that what is easy to build, easy to hide, and easy to adapt cannot be erased by force alone. Ingenuity over technology is a principle that often goes unnoticed in the grand narratives of war because it challenges the assumption that machines, weapons, and advanced equipment determine victory. History tends to glorify tanks, airplanes, bombs, and rifles, yet ingenuity, the human capacity to invent, adapt, and improvise, has repeatedly proven to be the decisive factor in countless conflicts. Technology can dominate the battlefield only when it is used intelligently. Without ingenuity, even the most advanced weapons become tools of waste rather than instruments of power. Ingenuity transforms scarcity into opportunity, improvisation into strategy, and ordinary objects into instruments of survival. Technology is predictable. Every piece of machinery, from a rifle to a drone, operates within a set of known parameters. It has limits of range, speed, capacity, and maintenance. Its function can be studied, countered, or disrupted. Ingenuity, however, is boundless and unpredictable. It arises in the mind of someone who refuses to be constrained by limitations, someone who looks at what exists and asks how it can be used differently. Ingenuity does not depend on funding, supply chains, or infrastructure. It depends on observation, creativity, and the willingness to act. This is why ingenuity can level the playing field against forces that are technologically superior. In many historical conflicts, ingenuity has allowed smaller or less equipped forces to outmen, or outsmart armies with overwhelming firepower. In dense forests, narrow valleys, or urban environments, advanced technology can be cumbersome or ineffective. A tank cannot move silently through a forest. A drone cannot see through thick smoke or darkness. A missile cannot distinguish between combatants and civilians without guidance. Ingenuity fills these gaps. It creates solutions tailored to the environment, using resources at hand. A mud-filled trench, a string, a rusted blade, or even a discarded piece of metal can become a defensive measure far more effective than a conventional weapon in the right hands. Ingenuity thrives under constraint. Technology requires resources, fuel, electricity, spare parts, calibration, and training. Ingenuity requires thought. A soldier who cannot rely on artillery, air support, or resupply learns to think creatively. Each limitation becomes a catalyst for innovation. For example, a broken radio can inspire a signal system using lights, mirrors, or sound. A shortage of ammunition can lead to traps, diversions, or psychological strategies that disrupt the enemy. Ingenuity does not wait for permission. It operates within the immediate environment, leveraging what is available and turning scarcity into tactical advantage. The psychological impact of ingenuity cannot be underestimated. Soldiers who face overwhelming technology expect predictability. They anticipate the way machines and conventional tactics will behave. When they encounter ingenuity, they confront the unexpected. A simple trap, an improvised barricade, or a clever diversion challenges their assumptions and disrupts their confidence. Technology may wound or kill, but ingenuity instills doubt, fear, and hesitation. A single well-placed improvised device can halt a unit, slow an advance, or force a superior army to rethink its plans entirely. The effects are often magnified because ingenuity operates in ways that conventional training does not anticipate. Ingenuity also amplifies the effectiveness of technology when combined wisely. Weapons alone cannot guarantee victory. They require strategy, timing, and adaptation. A rifle is deadly, but its potential multiplies when used by someone who understands terrain, enemy behavior, and creative tactics. A simple distraction, a hidden path, or an unexpected maneuver can turn a technologically superior opponent into a vulnerable target. Ingenuity enhances every tool, machine, and weapon, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. Moreover, ingenuity is contagious. When one soldier discovers a method that works, it spreads quickly. Unlike expensive technology that requires production and distribution, an idea can replicate across units and environments almost instantly. One improvised device, one clever strategy can inspire others to adapt and innovate. This ripple effect can destabilize even the most organized forces. A technologically advanced army may respond by sending specialists, developing countermeasures, or enforcing regulations, but ingenuity evolves faster than bureaucratic structures can react. The dynamic nature of human creativity outpaces rigid systems. Ingenuity is also inherently adaptive. Technology has fixed parameters. It cannot spontaneously adjust to unexpected conditions. Ingenuity, in contrast, evolves in real time. A soldier who creates a makeshift weapon can modify it instantly if circumstances change. If the enemy avoids one path, another trap can be prepared. If weather conditions alter visibility, signals can be adjusted. This constant adaptation ensures that ingenuity remains effective under conditions that would render technology inefficient or useless. Where machines rely on calibration, humans rely on observation, anticipation, and quick thinking. History provides countless examples of ingenuity triumphing over technology. In guerrilla warfare, smaller forces have repeatedly defeated larger armies through cunning, unconventional strategies. A river crossing can be defended with nothing more than ropes, nets, and stakes. A supply line can be disrupted with simple obstructions and psychological tactics. The effect is disproportionate. What requires hundreds of soldiers and complex coordination to achieve with technology can be accomplished with a few individuals using ingenuity. In each case, the human mind proves more adaptable than machinery. Ingenuity also transforms ordinary environments into tactical advantages. A forest becomes a maze of observation points. An abandoned building becomes a fortress. A simple piece of wire becomes a deterrent. Soldiers who rely solely on technology often overlook the potential of the terrain, assuming that their machines can overcome any obstacle. Those who use ingenuity turn every rock, tree, and shadow into an ally. The environment itself becomes part of the strategy, magnifying the impact of minimal resources. Technology depends on maintenance and logistics, and when these systems fail, it becomes useless. Ingenuity, however, is self-sufficient. A clever solution does not break down. It does not require spare parts or fuel. It does not need a network of specialists. It exists in the mind and hands of those who implement it. This independence makes ingenuity particularly effective in prolonged conflicts, sieges, or situations where supply lines are disrupted. When technology falters, ingenuity persists, providing solutions when conventional methods are unavailable. Ingenuity also fosters resilience. Soldiers who rely on their creative thinking are less likely to succumb to despair when outmatched. They are empowered by the knowledge that even the smallest action can alter outcomes. This psychological resilience is a force multiplier. Technology cannot instill confidence or courage. Ingenuity, by enabling action in the face of adversity, strengthens morale and determination. A soldier who knows how to improvise feels agency even against overwhelming odds. In modern warfare, the balance between technology and ingenuity remains crucial. Advanced weapons and sophisticated systems are essential, but without the human capacity to adapt, they are insufficient. A computer-guided drone is powerful, but it is vulnerable to creative countermeasures. A missile may destroy a building, but it cannot anticipate improvised defenses, psychological operations, or unexpected human tactics. Ingenuity fills the gaps that technology alone cannot address, ensuring that human agency remains central to combat effectiveness. Ingenuity also democratizes power. While advanced technology is expensive and controlled by state institutions, ingenuity requires only awareness, observation, and creative thinking. Individuals and small groups can leverage ingenuity to resist, disrupt, or counter superior forces. This quality has made ingenuity a cornerstone of resistance movements, insurgencies, and asymmetric warfare throughout history. It shifts the balance from dependence on material resources to dependence on human skill, insight, and adaptability. Ingenuity over technology emphasizes the importance of observation and learning. Soldiers and strategists who prioritize ingenuity constantly study their environment, anticipate enemy behavior, and experiment with unconventional approaches. They analyze failures as opportunities for improvement and successes as templates for further innovation. Technology may enhance capabilities, but without insight, observation, and adaptability, it cannot create the dynamic advantage that ingenuity provides. The power of fear as a weapon of war is one of the oldest and most effective strategies ever employed. Yet it is often overlooked in discussions dominated by technology, strategy, and numbers. Fear is intangible, invisible, and unpredictable, but it shapes human behavior more profoundly than bullets or bombs ever can. On a battlefield, fear can paralyze, confuse, and disrupt entire units. It can make the strongest soldiers hesitate, the most disciplined commanders question their plans, and the most technologically advanced armies falter. Fear does not require material resources or elaborate planning. It requires understanding, timing, and the ability to exploit human instincts. Its power lies in its subtlety and its persistence, and when wielded wisely, it can alter the outcome of conflicts without a single direct confrontation. Fear works because it is deeply personal. It attacks the mind before it reaches the body, preying on anticipation and expectation. Soldiers marching through a forest do not fear an empty path. They fear the unseen, the unknown, the possibility of danger hidden in shadow. In darkness, a rustle, a glint of metal, or a faint whisper can trigger instinctive reactions that slow movement, create hesitation, and force caution. Unlike a weapon, which has a fixed effect on the body, fear is variable, amplified, or diminished by perception, experience, and imagination. This makes it a weapon that multiplies the effects of minimal effort, turning small actions into enormous psychological consequences. Throughout history, fear has been deliberately cultivated as part of military strategy. Armies have used drums, horns, fires, and sudden noises to unsettle the enemy before an attack. Simple tactics such as leaving bodies in visible positions, exaggerating numbers, or creating unpredictable traps have instilled dread without direct engagement. These methods manipulate the mind, forcing opponents to expend energy on anxiety rather than action. The human brain reacts to threat signals faster than it can reason. Fear exploits this gap between instinct and logic, causing errors, miscalculations, and vulnerability. Fear also thrives on unpredictability. Predictable threats can be managed. Soldiers learn routines, anticipate attacks, and adjust movements accordingly. But when danger is intermittent, unexpected, or unconventional, fear takes root. Improvised devices, hidden traps, and seemingly innocuous objects that conceal danger create a constant state of uncertainty. The enemy begins to question every step, every decision, and every assumption. This pervasive doubt undermines confidence and slows operations, demonstrating that fear is not just a momentary response, but a strategic tool capable of shaping behavior over time. The psychological effects of fear extend beyond immediate combat. It infiltrates planning, communication, and morale. Commanders may overcompensate, diverting resources to counter imagined threats or excessive precautions. Soldiers may hesitate to follow orders or take initiative. Units may fragment under pressure, communication may break down, and coordination may falter. In essence, fear destabilizes the organizational structure, making technology, numbers, and training less effective. Even superior forces with overwhelming firepower are not immune. Fear erodes the very foundations upon which military advantage is built. Fear is amplified when it intersects with uncertainty and isolation. Soldiers operating in unfamiliar terrain, separated from support or deprived of reliable intelligence, are more vulnerable to psychological tactics. Simple signs such as a tripwire, a displaced object, or an unexpected sound become magnified in the mind. Each ambiguous stimulus triggers an assessment. Is this danger real or is it imagined? This constant evaluation exhausts mental resources, slows decision-making, and magnifies minor threats. In this way, fear functions not only as a reactive force, but as a proactive strategy, shaping behavior long before engagement. Fear is also inherently contagious. In a unit, the response of one soldier influences the behavior of others. Panic spreads faster than bullets. When individuals react to fear, hesitation spreads, coordination fails, and morale declines. This social aspect of fear magnifies its effect exponentially. A single successful psychological tactic can ripple through an entire formation, multiplying the impact far beyond the initial action. In this sense, fear is a force multiplier, capable of creating disproportionate consequences from small, carefully placed provocations. The use of fear in warfare is closely tied to creativity and ingenuity. It does not require high technology or massive resources. It requires understanding human behavior and exploiting it. An improvised device, a hidden trap, or a simple ruse can generate fear that exceeds the impact of conventional weapons. Historical accounts are full of examples where smaller forces used fear to counteract superior numbers and equipment. In forests, mountains, and urban settings, unconventional tactics induced hesitation, confusion, and retreat in enemies far better armed and organized. This demonstrates that fear is not a substitute for strategy, but a complementary force that amplifies its effects. Fear is also cumulative. Repeated exposure to uncertain threats conditions soldiers to anticipate danger constantly. This creates chronic stress, reduces reaction time, and fosters defensive behaviors that disrupt initiative. Over time, fear reshapes the rhythm of operations. Units move slower, act more cautiously, and expend energy maintaining vigilance rather than pursuing objectives. The enemy becomes reactive, defensive, and predictable, making them vulnerable to further manipulation and strategic exploitation. This way, fear transforms from an immediate reaction into a long-term operational advantage. One of the most powerful aspects of fear is that it can be weaponized without direct contact. Physical confrontation is not always necessary. The mere perception of danger is enough to alter behavior. Signs of an unseen enemy, traces of traps, or rumors of activity can generate anxiety and disrupt decision-making. This allows smaller or less equipped forces to influence outcomes without risking direct engagement. Fear creates a psychological battlefield that extends beyond geography, numbers, or material resources. It transforms perception into a strategic asset, making soldiers and commanders expend effort to counter threats that may not even exist. Fear also reshapes the relationship between technology and human perception. Advanced weapons and sophisticated systems are formidable, but they cannot eliminate uncertainty or anticipate human ingenuity. Soldiers with superior firepower can still hesitate, misinterpret signals, or fall into traps if fear is skillfully applied. Conversely, those who harness fear can leverage simple tools to counter technological advantages. A wire, a displaced object, or an improvised device may seem insignificant, but the uncertainty it generates multiplies its strategic impact. In this sense, fear turns ordinary objects into extraordinary weapons and ordinary tactics into decisive strategies. Another dimension of fear is its ethical and moral ambiguity. Commanders who use fear understand its power but must navigate the consequences of psychological manipulation. Unlike conventional weapons, which produce tangible results, fear operates in the mind, creating invisible wounds that may persist long after the conflict ends. Civilians, allies, and enemies alike may experience the lingering effects of fear, making it both powerful and morally complex. Yet in many cases, the strategic advantage gained outweighs the immediate ethical concerns, which is why fear has been consistently employed across cultures and eras. Fear is heightened when it intersects with environmental factors. Darkness, fog, dense forests, mountains, and urban rubble amplify uncertainty and perception of danger. Environmental unpredictability magnifies the effects of simple psychological tactics. A wire in the forest, a displaced object in rubble, a shadow in darkness, all become symbols of potential harm. Soldiers trained to rely on sight, sound, and predictability are forced to operate in a state of heightened anxiety. The environment becomes a co-conspirator in generating fear, increasing its effectiveness exponentially. The manipulation of fear requires discipline, observation, and timing. It is not random or chaotic. It is carefully applied to maximize impact. A well-placed tripwire, an improvised device, or a sudden sound creates uncertainty at a moment when soldiers are most vulnerable. The key is to exploit anticipation, expectation, and instinct. Fear is most effective when the enemy believes that danger is constant, unpredictable, and personal. This psychological pressure slows reactions, disrupts coordination, and forces defensive behaviors that can be exploited strategically. Fear also interacts with human imagination. When soldiers cannot see the threat, their minds fill in the blanks. The imagination often exaggerates risk, turning minor hazards into perceived catastrophic threats. Simple measures like a rusted shovel tied to a wire are amplified in the minds of those who encounter them. What may be a minor obstruction in daylight becomes a terrifying unknown in darkness or uncertainty. The psychological effect is disproportionately large compared to the physical impact, which is why fear is often more potent than direct confrontation. In asymmetric warfare, fear has been a decisive tool for the weaker side. Insurgents, resistance fighters, and defenders have long used fear to neutralize technological advantages held by more powerful armies. Small, unpredictable, and creative actions induce hesitation, erode morale, and disrupt operations. These tactics demonstrate that fear is not a last resort, but a fundamental strategy that can transform the balance of power. By leveraging human psychology, fear enables the underdog to shape outcomes in ways that pure technology cannot achieve. The cultivation of fear requires attentiveness to human behavior, observing how soldiers react to stimuli. Understanding their routines and predicting their responses allows psychological tactics to be precise and effective. Fear is not random terror. It is targeted, strategic, and cumulative. It exploits natural instincts, fight, flight, freeze, and turns them into operational tools. Soldiers who face fear constantly adjust, and in doing so, they expend energy, focus, and morale, leaving them less capable of responding to conventional threats. The power of individual resistance is a force that history often underestimates because conventional narratives focus on armies, nations, and large-scale strategies, while overlooking the profound impact a single person can have in shaping events. Individual resistance is born from a combination of courage, ingenuity, persistence, and moral company, conviction, and it can influence the course of conflicts in ways that technology, numbers, or strategy alone cannot. The soldier, the scout, the local civilian, or even the insurgent, when acting independently, can exploit gaps in the system, manipulate perception, and create disproportionate effects that ripple far beyond their immediate actions. This is why, even in wars dominated by mass forces and advanced weaponry, individual resistance remains a decisive and enduring factor. At its core, individual resistance is a response to imbalance. When one is outnumbered, outgunned, or outmaneuvered, the human mind seeks alternative solutions to confront overwhelming odds. Large armies depend on rules, procedures, coordination, and predictability. An individual operating outside the formal structure is not bound by these limitations. They can act spontaneously, improvise, and exploit weaknesses that bureaucracies or hierarchies fail to notice. Their freedom to innovate is their advantage, and this autonomy allows a single person to influence outcomes far beyond their apparent capacity. Individual resistance thrives on observation and awareness. The smallest details, a misplaced footstep, a shadow, a sound carried by the wind, can become critical intelligence. A solitary defender in a forest, an urban environment, or a mountainous pass can gather information, anticipate enemy movements, and act preemptively. These observations, when translated into strategic actions, create effects that are magnified across the battlefield. While armies rely on maps, reconnaissance, and intelligence networks, an individual can perceive subtleties that no machine or regimented procedure can see, giving them a unique form of influence. Ingenuity is inseparable from individual resistance. A person facing constraints, limited resources, hostile terrain, scarce ammunition, must think creatively to survive and resist. This creativity often produces unexpected solutions, from improvised weapons to unconventional defensive strategies. A tripwire fashioned from a rusted shovel, a signal system using light or sound, or a hidden observation post carved into natural terrain exemplifies how one person can turn scarcity into advantage. Such acts disrupt enemy operations not through brute force, but through precision, adaptability, and unpredictability, demonstrating that individual resistance is as much about mental acuity as it is about physical action. The psychological dimension of individual resistance is profound. A single person acting with determination can inspire fear, hesitation, or doubt in opponents. Fear is magnified when it is unpredictable and intimate. Soldiers who encounter resistance that cannot be easily explained or countered experience uncertainty and anxiety. This psychological effect slows advances, disrupts coordination, forces superior forces to divert attention and resources to neutralize threats that may seem minor but have an outsized impact. Individual resistance, therefore, is not merely a physical challenge to an enemy. It is a psychological strategy that exploits perception as effectively as any weapon. Persistence is a hallmark of effective individual resistance. Unlike armies, which may be withdrawn, reorganized, or demoralized over time, a single individual who adapts and endures can continuously challenge superior forces. Repeat. D actions, even small ones, accumulate into significant operational consequences. A single soldier who consistently disrupts patrols, sets traps, or reports intelligence can cause logistical delays, resource misallocations, and strategic reconsiderations. Over time, these repeated acts of resistance shape enemy behavior, alter deployment patterns, and impose psychological stress, demonstrating the long-term value of individual initiative. Individual resistance is also inherently adaptive. Unlike technology, which has fixed parameters, or rigid military plans, which assume predictable responses, one person can constantly adjust tactics to suit changing circumstances. If an enemy avoids a trap, the individual can modify the strategy. If terrain or weather shifts, new approaches can be devised immediately. This flexibility ensures that resistance remains effective even against larger, more technologically advanced forces. The ability to respond dynamically to new information is a force multiplier that conventional military thinking often struggles to account for. History provides countless examples where individual resistance reshaped battles, campaigns, or even wars. In conflicts where armies appeared invincible, the actions of one person disrupted momentum, bought time, or provided critical intelligence that changed outcomes. Scouts, saboteurs, and local defenders often influenced decisions at the strategic level simply because their resistance forced commanders to account for unpredictability. Their actions demonstrate that human agency, when exercised skillfully, can offset disparities in numbers, technology, and resources, revealing a truth often overlooked in conventional analyses of war. Individual resistance is not limited to physical acts of confrontation. It also encompasses moral courage, defiance, and the refusal to comply with oppressive systems. Civilians who hide allies, refuse cooperation, or sabotage enemy efforts contribute to resistance in ways that extend the battlefield into communities, cities, and regions. This form of resistance requires intelligence, stealth, and creativity, as it operates within the enemy's sphere of influence without being easily detectable. Its impact is cumulative, as each act of defiance strengthens the broader network of resistance and imposes operational and psychological costs on occupying or invading forces. The effects of individual resistance are amplified when combined with the principles of simplicity and ingenuity. A single person can exploit the environment, use minimal resources, and create a chain reaction that influences larger forces. A small obstruction, a hidden weapon, or a signal can multiply fear, delay movements, and force adjustments at multiple levels. These outcomes demonstrate that resistance is not measured by the scale of force applied, but by the strategic effectiveness and adaptability of actions taken. One individual acting intelligently and decisively can shift the balance in ways that entire divisions sometimes cannot anticipate. Individual resistance also reinforces the resilience of larger movements or armies. Those who resist independently provide intelligence, create diversions, or test enemy reactions in ways that protect others. Their actions reduce exposure, inform decision-making, and inspire collective courage. The psychological effect of knowing that someone is actively resisting behind enemy lines bolsters morale and fosters a sense of agency, which can be decisive in protracted conflicts. Resistance, therefore, functions both as a tactical instrument and a source of motivation and cohesion for allied forces. Another dimension of individual resistance is its capacity to disrupt control. Armies and organizations rely on predictability, communication, and hierarchical command structures. A single person who operates outside these structures introduces uncertainty, forcing commanders to adjust plans, deploy additional forces, or adopt defensive postures. These adjustments consume resources, time, and attention, reducing overall operational efficiency. Resistance, by challenging control, converts the supposed advantage of structure and coordination into a liability, demonstrating that the actions of one person can have systemic effects far beyond their immediate vicinity. Individual resistance also embodies the human element in war, which cannot be replicated by technology or massed force. Courage, creativity, and persistence are qualities unique to humans, and they become most evident in situations of extreme constraint or danger. A single person resisting demonstrates that conflict is not solely about equipment or numbers, but about human will and determination. This perspective challenges traditional assessments of power, highlighting that the measure of influence on a battlefield includes not only what is visible and quantifiable, but also what is psychological, adaptive, and human-centered. In many historical scenarios, individual resistance has forced militaries to reconsider doctrine, tactics, and strategy. When a small number of people repeatedly disrupt operations or inflict losses disproportionate to their size, commanders must adapt, often implementing new procedures, diverting resources, or creating specialized units. These changes, prompted by the actions of one or few individuals, ripple through organizational planning, demonstrating that resistance has strategic consequences far exceeding its immediate physical effect. The presence of determined individuals challenges assumptions of control and dominance, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. The legacy of individual resistance also extends beyond immediate military outcomes. Stories of bravery, defiance, and ingenuity inspire subsequent generations, shaping cultural memory and influencing how societies understand courage and agency. Individuals who resist, particularly against overwhelming odds, become symbols of resilience, reminding communities that power is not absolute, and that human action, no matter how small, can leave a lasting imprint on history. These narratives reinforce the idea that one person's commitment, creativity, and persistence can challenge authority, alter perceptions, and shape the course of events in ways that resonate long after the conflict ends. Individual resistance highlights the interplay between human agency, environment, and circumstance. The ability of a single person to exploit terrain, weather, enemy behavior, and timing demonstrates the importance of situational awareness and adaptability. Unlike mechanized forces or standardized procedures, individuals can integrate multiple dimensions of information, respond to changes instantaneously, and anticipate consequences in ways that rigid structures cannot. This adaptability creates a dynamic form of influence, allowing one person to act as both observer and actor, strategist and executor, simultaneously impacting the physical and psychological aspects of conflict. The impact of individual resistance is further magnified when it integrates with collective action. While one person can disrupt, delay, or influence, networks of resistance amplify these effects exponentially. Individual acts serve as nodes within a broader system, generating intelligence, coordinating actions, and creating conditions that allow larger strategies to succeed. The combination of independent initiative and coordinated effort demonstrates the symbiotic relationship between individual resistance and collective impact, highlighting the principle that effective resistance relies on both autonomy and integration within a broader context. Individual resistance also shapes the perception of power on the battlefield. Forces facing persistent resistance from a single individual or small group may overestimate the size, capability, or reach of their opponents. This perception creates caution, hesitation, and allocation of resources to address threats that may appear larger than they are. Fear and uncertainty, generated by individual resistance, multiply the strategic effect of minimal physical actions, reinforcing the principle that influence is not solely determined by material superiority, but by the ability to create doubt, unpredictability, and disruption. The value of individual resistance lies not only in its direct outcomes, but also in its capacity to provoke adaptation, innovation, and learning among adversaries. When an opponent encounters effective resistance, they are forced to reconsider assumptions, revise tactics, and develop countermeasures. This process consumes time, energy, and attention, often reducing the efficiency of larger operations. Individual resistance, therefore, functions as both a physical and cognitive constraint on superior forces, demonstrating that even small localized acts can have wide-ranging operational and strategic consequences. When control is threatened, rules change is a principle that reveals a harsh truth about human institutions, organizations, and military operations. Power is always fragile, and when it is challenged, even by small forces, it reacts not only with force, but with redefinition of what is permissible. Throughout history, those in positions of authority have relied on rules, procedures, and regulations to maintain order and predictability. These rules are designed to ensure that power flows in an expected manner, that actions can be monitored, and that outcomes can be controlled. Yet when an individual, a small group, or an unexpected tactic undermines that predictability, the response is often to change the rules rather than address the underlying threat directly. This principle is evident in military, political, and social contexts, and it demonstrates that control is never absolute. It is always provisional, contingent on the ability to suppress challenges or adapt the framework that governs behavior. The dynamics of power and control are particularly visible in warfare. Military institutions invest enormous resources in training, hierarchy, and protocol, believing that strict adherence to rules ensures operational success. Sold. Hires follow drills, commanders follow doctrine, and logistics operate according to carefully calibrated plans. These systems work effectively until an unpredictable element, a small, resourceful opponent, a local insurgent, or an improvised tactic, appears and disrupts the expected flow. When traditional methods fail to address these disruptions, those in authority often respond not by fundamentally changing strategy or admitting vulnerability, but by altering the rules. The rules are rewritten to suppress, restrict, or outlaw the very methods that proved effective against the dominant power, as though changing the definition of permissible action could restore control that has already been challenged. This process is deeply human and rooted in a psychological need to preserve authority. When control is threatened, admitting weakness is dangerous. It invites further challenges. By changing rules, institutions create the appearance of maintaining dominance while attempting to neutralize the threat. These changes often take the form of formal prohibitions, legal restrictions, or policy updates. In military contexts, a new regulation may ban an unconventional weapon, restrict certain behaviors, or impose penalties for unsanctioned tactics. In essence, the power structure shifts the boundaries of acceptable action to protect itself rather than directly confronting the ingenuity, resilience, or initiative that challenged its authority. Rules change under threat also reflects the tension between rigidity and adaptability. Large institutions depend on stability and predictability. Their rules are codified to ensure efficiency, coordination, and accountability. However, rigid systems struggle to accommodate the unpredictable actions of individuals or small groups who operate outside conventional frameworks. When an authority encounters behavior that falls outside established norms, it perceives not just a tactical challenge, but a challenge to its legitimacy. Changing the rules becomes a defensive maneuver, a way to reassert control, regain predictability, and define the boundaries of acceptable behavior in a way that protects the institution from further disruption. This principle is particularly evident when examining the responses to small but effective resistance in Historical conflicts. Soldiers, insurgents, or local defenders who employ simple, creative tactics often provoke official bans or restrictions on those methods. The reasoning is seldom about morality or legality alone. It is about preserving the perception of control. When a rusted shovel tied to a wire can disrupt patrols, wound soldiers, and delay operations, military authorities may declare such devices illegal, not necessarily because they are inherently dangerous, but because their effectiveness undermines the expectation that superior forces can dominate the battlefield. The act of banning the device is a symbolic assertion of authority, an attempt to redefine the limits of control when conventional dominance has been challenged. Changing rules under threat also reflects the adaptive nature of institutional power. Authorities respond to new threats by creating regulations that shape future behavior, even if those regulations cannot undo the impact of past challenges. This process serves multiple purposes. It codifies a response for future reference, signals to personnel that control is being maintained, and discourages others from attempting similar tactics. The new rules often carry both practical and psychological weight. They attempt to restore order by formalizing restrictions, and they communicate that the institution remains capable of defining and enforcing what is permissible. In doing so, authorities attempt to regain a sense of stability that has been disrupted by unforeseen actions. The phenomenon of changing rules also highlights the relationship between innovation and regulation. When individuals or small groups innovate, they expose gaps in the existing framework. Their actions demonstrate that the rules governing behavior, operations, or engagement are not exhaustive. They are limited by assumptions, expectations, and blind spots. Institutions respond by expanding, clarifying, or modifying these rules, attempting to absorb the disruptive innovation within a new structure. This interplay between ingenuity and regulation illustrates a fundamental tension. Creativity can exploit gaps, but power reacts by closing them, often redefining the parameters of action to prevent recurrence. The rules themselves become instruments for maintaining dominance, rather than purely guides for ethical or strategic conduct. This principle extends beyond the military into broader human systems. In societies, corporations, and governments, rules change when unexpected forces threaten established hierarchies. When employees find loopholes in bureaucratic processes, when citizens challenge unjust policies, or when social movements disrupt norms, authorities respond by updating laws, policies, or procedures. The change is rarely neutral. It is intended to preserve control, reduce vulnerability, and prevent further challenges. This mirrors the dynamic seen in warfare. Control is never absolute, and rules serve as tools for maintaining authority in the face of uncertainty or resistance. The reaction of changing rules under threat also exposes a limitation of rigid systems. They can address symptoms, but not necessarily the root cause of disruption. A ban on a particular tactic or device may limit its use temporarily, but it does not eliminate ingenuity, creativity, or determination. Those who were effective before will often adapt, invent new methods, or find ways to circumvent the new rules. The system of control thus enters a continuous cycle of adaptation, where every innovation or act of resistance provokes regulatory response, which in turn spurs further innovation. This dynamic underscores that power and control are provisional, constantly negotiated, and perpetually vulnerable to challenge. Changing rules also has symbolic and psychological dimensions. By codifying prohibitions in response to specific actions, authorities signal to their personnel that they retain the capacity to define and enforce order. This can have a calming effect internally, reassuring troops or employees that the leadership is in control. Externally, it communicates to adversaries or challengers that their actions are being monitored, evaluated, and countered. The symbolic power of rules, what they are, represent about authority, legitimacy, and predictability, often matters as much as their practical enforcement. This interplay between perception and regulation demonstrates the multifaceted function of rule changes under threat. Furthermore, the act of changing rules reveals the vulnerabilities of superiority itself. Institutions that rely heavily on dominance, technology, or hierarchy are particularly sensitive to challenges that expose unpredictability. When a single individual or a small group demonstrates that superior forces can be disrupted, the institution's confidence in its own methods is undermined. The reaction to alter rules acknowledges that the established framework was insufficient to contain the threat. This acknowledgement, even if implicit, confirms that superiority is conditional, dependent on compliance, and susceptible to disruption when unforeseen variables emerge. Changing rules under threat also reflects the social and organizational psychology of authority. Institutions are designed to minimize risk, maintain hierarchy, and project stability. When faced with unpredictable resistance, the natural response is to restore equilibrium by redefining what is permissible. This preserves internal cohesion and ensures that personnel understand the boundaries of acceptable action. At the same time, the change often aims to discourage imitation by signaling that previous tactics will no longer be tolerated. Rules thus serve as both protective measures and deterrents, attempting to regulate behavior while preserving the legitimacy of authority in the face of challenge. This principle also demonstrates the inherent tension between freedom and control. When rules are changed in response to threats, they limit autonomy, constrain initiative, and define acceptable behavior more narrowly. Those who innovate or resist are curtailed not by their original effectiveness, but by the institution's need to maintain dominance. In this sense, rules are reactive instruments. They evolve in response to challenges rather than proactively guiding behavior. This reactive nature underscores the vulnerability of control. It is maintained through absolute power, but through constant adaptation to the unpredictable actions of others. The process of changing rules when control is threatened also highlights the iterative nature of institutional adaptation. Each challenge provokes a response. Each response reshapes the landscape of acceptable action, and each reshaping prompts new forms of resistance. This cycle reflects the dynamic tension between authority and initiative, rigidity and adaptability, dominance and creativity. While rules aim to stabilize, they also demonstrate the limits of control. They exist not to prevent challenges entirely, but to manage them within a framework that preserves the perception of order and authority. Changing rules under threat also illustrates the interplay between ethics, legality, and strategy. Authorities often frame rule changes in terms of fairness, safety, or legality, but the underlying motivation is frequently strategic, to restore predictability and suppress disruptive behavior. This dual function of rules, both normative and instrumental, reveals the complex relationship between power and regulation. Rules are not merely guidelines for behavior, they are tools for maintaining dominance, controlling perception, and shaping outcomes in a world where unpredictability is inevitable.